Good evening, everyone. Just getting set up here. It's all coming together. This is Rabbi Joshua Hoffman at Valley Beth Shalom, and it's a privilege to begin learning with you this evening on our third class, Prayer Mastery, High Holidays, and the prayers of the High Holidays. And tonight we're going to be delving deeply into the centerpiece of the Yom Kippur prayers, the Slichot, or the petitions of forgiveness. And, pardon me, and there's actual real flies behind that screen, and I just swatted at one. And we'll be able to spend a little bit of time to expand on the grand concept that we're learning through this class, which is how do we apply the wisdom that is found in the Machzor, the book that we'll be using for the High Holidays, the words that are contained herein, and to translate the words that are on the page into meaningful experience, even an experience of transformation. So as everything is loading up, let me just make sure we're good to go here. So far, it looks like we're good there. Fantastic. Okay. Okay. And one more, I want to say hello to all my friends who are participating so I can see you all. I see you all. Fantastic. So, this evening, we'll be discussing one of the centerpieces of the High Holiday Liturgy, the High Holiday Prayers, which takes place only on Yom Kippur, although we'll learn a little bit about how some of these words are carried throughout the entire year. Sometimes they're recited at the beginning of the new month, and throughout the journeys of our lives. And there are even words that we recite in the final moments in our lives where we have reached a certain pinnacle of understanding and wisdom and of growth and hopefully of health. And as we're watching the moments of our lives wane, we recite these words as an affirmation that our attempts to be as honest and as compassionate and as loving as we could possibly be as a human being is still something that we strive for even in the final moments of our lives. I'd like to begin with a word from Yehuda Amichai. Let's get Yehuda Amichai here. He's the great Israeli poet, and he wrote about Yom Kippur. And I want to share these words. Make sure that it's nice and big for everybody to see. This he wrote about Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, without my father and without my mother, is not Yom Kippur. From the blessing of their hands upon my head, only the tremor remains like a tremor of a motor that has not stopped even after their death. My mother died just 5 years ago. She's still caught in the bureaucratic process between the heavenly offices above and the paperwork below. My father, who died long ago, has already been resurrected in other places, but not in my place. Yom Kippur without my father and without my mother is not Yom Kippur. Therefore, I eat in order to remember and drink in order to not to forget, and arrange the vows and classify the oaths by time and decree. By day, we cried out, forgive us. And in the evening, we cried out, open the gates of heaven for us. But I say, for our sake, forget us. Leave us be at the time of the locking of the gates, for the day is done. The last rays of sunlight are shattered in the synagogue stained glass window. The sunlight is not shattered. We are shattered. The word shattered is shattered. Yuda Amichai is not only the preeminent poet of Israel, but as you read these words, which were in translation by a man named Black, they are words that shudder to the very core of our identity as Jews and as human beings. He's speaking to something so elemental in his strivings and his tension with God and with identity and with his legacy and with his history. And in those moments, we find such powerful truth. I wanted to begin by introducing these words, carried from this discussion that we had last week, in which we were talking about the high holidays. It's very much like a grand epic drama of our lives. And for a few moments, we are the directors. And this is a time beginning today from the new month of Elul until the conclusion of the month of Tishrei, after the holiday of Sukkot, in which we go through this journey each day of, first of all, what we learned, a tearing down of the walls, as Rabbi Alan Liu pointed out to us, a recognition that every facet of our grand masterpiece of life is broken, is incomplete. And even the parts of our lives that seem complete are worthy of a second pass, maybe even a remodeling effort to understand that the cracks and divisions that settle in our lives, just like in a home that we build together, slowly patched together through this journey and this process called the high holidays. And as we recognize that we are the directors of our faith, and we are not only recognizing all that is incomplete in our lives, but we're beginning to plan ahead and to forge for a future, a year to come in which all the promises that we make will be ones that we strive and aspire to fulfill in the year to come. We recognize that we aren't entirely the directors of our lives and our faith so much, and that surprise and happenstance and circumstance throw us into momentary chaos. That's such a real feeling right now. The sense that our plans and our visions for the world as we envisioned it ought to be, right or wrong, if it was a vision, it was the vision that we had. And to recognize that that vision has been shattered, just like the words of Rabbi Yuda Amichai, if he should only be a rabbi, to say, we are shattered, but the word shattered is shattered. Is such an important moment for us to recognize that we are incomplete and that we are not the directors of every aspect of our lives. So confronting that reality through our prayers of the high holidays, which we spoke about last week, we talked about the moment in which we recognize that there is a power greater than ourselves. We call it a sovereign, Melech Elyon, the sovereign on high, the recognition that there is not an earthly authority that determines our fate, but that there is a celestial, a divine, a all free-flowing authority that has presence and it gives direction to our lives. That we encounter that, we touch that chaos, we touch that uncertainty through these moments of the holidays. And then to reach this day of Yom Kippur and to recognize that as we look at the masterpiece of our lives and we see that we are not the entire directors of our faith, but that we recognize that there's a part that we do play in the unfolding drama of our lives. And that unfolding drama is something that, again, like Amichai said, he said, leave us be when the gates close. Let us go back to the world of striving and divining, of being able to reach out into the world with all of the capacity and will that you've given us, and to be able to do so with the very best that hopefully this prayer journey has enabled us to achieve in all of those goals we set for ourselves. So tonight, what we want to talk about is the moment in which we entitle it Teshuvah, or of the path of forgiveness, the path of turning the returning moment in which we recognize that we are neither the entire director of our fate, nor are we exclusively at the will of a director that guides every action that we think that we're making on our own in this world, and that we are subject to forces that are far more powerful than us. But that somewhere in the nexus, we recognize that we truly are empowered. And when we recognize that there are certain aspects of us not playing our part and not playing our part or not fulfilling our role as being good partners in the fulfillment of this grand masterpiece of our lives. So we're going to study that. We're going to study the origins of it. We're going to do a little bit of the history of it. We're going to do a little bit of the memory of it as we read some of the poem already. And then we're going to begin to talk about the presence of the experience, of what does it mean to literally open up the book and to say, for the sin which we have committed against you, and to say it with a certain kind of sincerity, a certain kind of authenticity, and then to be able to turn towards the future in conclusion with that and to say, this is a place which we now make a turn and chart a new path, or we pick up a new color from a paintbrush and we begin to outline the next great image of a masterpiece in our lives. That's the work that the entire high holiday season hopes to achieve. And Yom Kippur is the very moment when we recognize not that we are out of control and not that we are only in control, but that we are in partnership with a possibility that our control or our capacity to be in control is met in partnership with forces that bring us blessing and bring us goodness. This is our wish. So let's take a look. I want to begin first from the rabbinic tradition. This is on the concept of Teshuvah. And there it says on Teshuvah, this is from the Pirkei Avot. So this is a 2nd century of the Common Era text. And this is a beautiful moment in the text. This is a moment in which Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who is the great kind of founder of rabbinic Judaism, is the one who takes the early workings of the rabbinic tradition and with the pleading of, I'm sorry, hold on just a moment. Pleading in front of the emperor in Rome is enabled to bring all of the sages to a city called Yavne and to establish the rabbinic headquarters, the Sanhedrin. And in the middle of the Sanhedrin, Rabbi Yochanan is quoted as asking his 4 most prized students, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Yossi, and Elazar ben Azari. And he asked them the questions, go out into the world and see what does it take for a person to live a good life. And Rabbi Eliezer, who we're going to teach about tonight, and it's a great text to study at another point. Rabbi Eliezer teaches a good eye, right? What does it take for a person? It takes a person to have a good eye, insight, silent wisdom, the recognition and response to how people behave. I'm sorry, everybody can hear me okay? Can I get a thumbs up? I got a note that maybe I'm not being heard. Can you hear me all right? This is the most moment. Okay, let's make sure we're okay. Sorry, folks. Can I get some thumbs up if it works? That's right. Sorry, folks. Thanks for your patience. Oh, no wonder. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? How's that, folks? That should be much better. Yay! Thank you so much. I appreciate your patience as you were watching. And
Can you hear me now?
we could go all the way back to the beginning if you missed it. But I'm going to pick up from where we left off. Okay? So, wowzers. I was talking about Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabbi Eliezer, who is one of the 4 prized students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, was asked by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, along with his colleagues, to go out into the world and find out what was it that was necessary to live a good life. And Rabbi Eliezer has a good eye. And while Rabbi Yochanan in the teaching doesn't ultimately accept his word as the most valuable contribution to the conversation of what is the good life, it's certainly resonant with us. There's a residue of his insight that we continue to carry forward. And the next teaching is a series of teachings about all of his students. And they say each of the rabbis that he sent out in the world to determine what would be the best thing for a good life, they all had 3 things to teach. So Rabbi Eliezer teaches this. Let the honor of your friend be as dear to you as your own. And be not easily provoked to anger. And repent one day before your death. Or shuv yom echad lifnei mitatach. Repent, do tshuva one day before you die. This idea of teshuva, of course, implied by the teaching of Rabbi Eliezer, is that it's something that one must constantly do. The sense that there's so much uncertainty in life and that one doesn't have a verified recognition of the last day of their life. The idea that one should fulfill the responsibility of teshuva in their lives is something that obviously should take place as often and frequently in your life as much as possible. To wait for Yom Kippur to say sorry to somebody that you really hurt is almost as if it's too late. But to recognize that this is a moment in which teshuva is possible and that the practice of teshuva is something that we are rehearsing and also fulfilling on this day, is something that clearly resonates with us as the Jewish people. How did that begin? Why is it that we have a day in our calendar in which we formally, ritualistically practice the process of forgiveness? It's interesting to note, and it's important to note, that the many aspects, elements of the high holidays were not exclusively Jewish experiences. While currently there are no other peoples in the world that practice the rituals of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur like we as Jews do today and continue to do so throughout the generations. At the time that Israel was being formed, and at the time that the community was trying to understand its relationship with this sovereign power that is neither tangible nor audible, that the quest to understand that was borrowed from the cultures of the surrounding peoples. And so we have many examples, in particular from the Babylonian people, in which there was a day of coronation. In the Babylonian experience, it was called Akitu. And Akitu is the holiday season. There, they had it for 5 days. But we Jews, we like to do everything twice as much, I guess. So there they had 5 days. They had a coronation day, and they also had a day called Kuparu. Kuparu was a very similar thing that we also find in our high holiday liturgy, in which there was an animal, a ram, that was brought before the people, in which there was a placing of the sins of the people upon the ram, and then the ram was sacrificed, which is a very similar ritual practice that ancient Israel was accustomed to for these particular days. So the idea that this is a sui generis, a completely unique kind of experience to Judaism, is something that historically wasn't accurate. Now, of course, what we've learned is 2 very important things. One is that when the Babylonians were having these rituals, they had a very particular understanding of what they were trying to affect. There was no urgency. There was no attempt to change the divine forces because they believed so wholeheartedly that those divine forces were totally beyond any control. There was no relationship with those divine forces, only complete loyalty and fealty. But where there was influence was in a king, person of body and form, who was responsible for the social conduct, responsible for even the interpersonal conduct, responsible even for the personal conduct of all the members of the kingdom. And this whole idea of the coronation celebration, which emerged from Babylonian culture, was something that our people borrowed and then began to apply with our own unique understanding of what it is that we're trying to accomplish. Historically, Judaism's contributions to the world aren't necessarily the rituals themselves, even though Passover is a pretty powerful holiday, and we can talk about that at another point. But for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to be unique holidays, that's something that is even vague in our Bible. There's no mention of Rosh Hashanah. There's no mention of Yom Kippur. There is a day in which we read in the book of Numbers that we are commanded to imitem et nafshotechem. There's a day in which we are committed to afflict our souls, with no definition of fasting or of al-chet or of prayer in a synagogue all day, none of that. Not even the rituals of like sacrifices, none of that stuff. It just says that you should afflict yourselves. And for Rosh Hashanah, there's only one oblique reference that says that this will be the Rosh Chodesh of the year. And in it as well, we only read in the Psalms that says, Tiku b'chodesh shofar, that you only on this one particular month will you blow the shofar. Just keep in mind that shofar, back to that Babylonian practice. If they were also committed to sacrificing a ram, well, it's the ram's horn that we blow to herald the coming of the new year, which we began in this month today of Elul. Even the word Tishrei is not a Hebrew word. Tishrei is a borrowed word from the Babylonian language, which we now have incorporated into our own. So the one thing that's important to know about what we're talking about here, when we speak of the history, what we understand is that the history of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and this journey was not something that was solely created by the Jewish people. And the second thing that is so very, very, very powerful and leads us to our second part of our teaching, which is that we as Jewish people have taken upon ourselves this responsibility to reiterate, to reenact the drama of this coronation ever since those moments when we first discovered it to be about our relationship with the divine source of creation, the great director of all that there is. And knowing that we continue to do that even until today is a very, extremely powerful notion of who we are as human beings and what purpose we are meant to fulfill. Even now in the 21st century, even now as we're about to spend a holiday unlike any other, in which we're going to be looking through these screens and for me, staring at a little green light and relating to you as if you're in my living room, which I hope that you'll come and visit someday. But that the continual reiteration and re-dramatization of this journey of us recognizing that we are the directors of our destinies. And we have this journey of tearing down and rebuilding in order to build the destiny that we are meant to fulfill. That journey and that rehearsal of that journey is so very important and continues to do so year after year after year. So let me just say parenthetically, if there's ever a question about how you're going to commemorate the holidays this year. How are you going to make this time meaningful? Hopefully what we're learning in this class and in the succeeding classes, and hopefully what we're going to continue to learn throughout the entire month of Elul. And if you want to participate in all the great things that are being offered at Valley Beth Shalom, or you take the time to be a great student of your soul through this months-long journey to coming home and returning your soul back to its roots and its origins. That work is done in concert with generations that have come before you, and with all of our hope and optimism, the generations yet to come. History and now memory. I want to go back to the Amichai poem again, and now I want you to read it a little bit differently. I thought it's a great poem, and unfortunately, because you can't see it, it's just worth doing again. So let's read it again. Are we hearing me better now? Is everybody okay? Yes? Are we okay here? I got somebody from YouTube telling me that it's a little squeaky. Hopefully it's been fixed. And I really appreciate your tolerance and understanding as things are a little bit off kilter. So it says a poem. Again, Yud Amichai, poet laureate of the state of Israel. Passed away in 2000. Yom Kippur without my father and without my mother is not Yom Kippur. Now let me just parse that for a moment. What you understand in that one first powerful sentence is he does not have Yom Kippur without memory. And what's the memory? It's the same thing that you have when you walk into a synagogue and you have that experience of being surrounded by people that you're familiar with. And if it's been the same place that you've been a part of for 30, 40, 50 years, maybe it's even been the place that it's been the generations of your families that you're sitting in the seats where your grandparents sat. If that's the kind of experience, then he is beginning to tell us that without our parents, it's not Yom Kippur. And what is Yom Kippur for him? It's not about the history. It's not Babylonian, Akitu, and Kuparu, and scapegoats, and Chetz, and Ashamnus, and all that stuff. It's none of that, right? It's from the blessing of their hands upon my head that only the tremor remains, like the tremor of a motor that has not stopped even after their death. Something very powerful and resonant is happening here beyond the words. My mother died just 5 years ago. She's still caught in the bureaucratic process between the heavenly office above and the paperwork below, which I think means that he still has unresolved matters of the relationship with his mother, and maybe Yom Kippur can help to meet out, to work through. My father, who died long ago, has already been resurrected in other places, but not in my place. A beautiful thing to say that he's not the sole determinant of his parents' legacy, that there is something far more powerful. Maybe it's the recognition that he's let his father go to be a part of the cosmos, or maybe that he's let his father go and everything powerful and decent and loving with him that he is representing in his life is being shared out in the world. Either one of those, I think, is a beautiful reading. I hope you agree of what he's saying here. Yom Kippur without my father and without my mother is not Yom Kippur. Therefore, I eat in order to remember and drink in order not to forget. Just to be clear, he probably was fasting on Yom Kippur. But what he's saying here as a poet is he's saying that if the mitzvah was for us to fast so that we can remember, if the very thing that we want to remember is absent, then we have to do the thing that helps us to remember. And maybe it's Ima's chicken noodle soup, or maybe it's the sort of experience of great conversations that he shared with his father over a glass of wine. I don't know, but it's clearly a mental and spiritual experience, and not in particular a physical experience. And arrange the vows and classify the oaths by time and degree. That sounds like the synagogue. By day we cried out, Salach lanu, forgive us. And in the evening we cried out, Patach lanu shar, Open the gates of heaven for us. But I say, forget for our sake. And he says to God, forget for our sake. Forget us. Leave us be. At the time of the locking in the gates, for the day is done. Right? What he's saying is so powerful. He's saying, if we're going through all these gesticulations about being forgiven and open up the gates for us and let us afflict our souls and all of those things that we do on Yom Kippur, forget about us. Don't be concerned about us. Leave us be, because all of this is not for you, God. It's for us. All of this is not for you, God. It's for us. The last rays of sunlight are shattered in the synagogue stained glass window. The sunlight's not shattered. We are shattered. The word shattered is shattered. What a beautiful conclusion to a statement. The word shattered is shattered. As Yom Kippur, as often if you do a little bit of study about the words that we're going to study tonight, the Ashamnu prayer, you would think that we're talking about afflicting our souls and we're asking for forgiveness. It should be something minor and dirgy. But this is victorious and triumphant. The idea that we're rehearsing a moment in which our practice of beating our fists against our chest is not for us to begin the process, but it's the recognition that the process is complete. And what is the process? The process is complete is to say, we are shattered. We're not complete. A whole year goes by, and we feel like all of our efforts and all of our strivings and all of our goals and picking ourselves up by the bootstraps and white knuckling our way through every challenge and struggle and difficulty that exists in our lives, why that's what we're supposed to be doing. And then Rosh Hashanah comes and Yom Kippur comes and knocks it all down to the ground. And it reminds us that we are just souls that don't have the power to manipulate and to construct and build in the world, but to just be. And the shattering that takes place is the recognition. Hopefully it's a softening. It's a sweetening. It's a shattering that takes place that recognizes that if we have fulfilled our duties through these holidays, that what's taken place is that we are opened up. The shattering has broken us open and enabled, in the words of Leonard Cohen, the great musician and poet himself, to let the light in. That's where the light comes in. So let's just go now a little bit more into this idea of sin. And then we're going to talk about Ashamnu, and then we're going to call it a night. I hope everybody's okay. Thank you, Robert, for Psalm 23. You prepare a table for me. That's a beautiful thing, right? You have to recognize that you're sitting down at a table that somebody has long created for you. And whether that's the generation that came before you or the loved one is what is leaving for you behind, that kind of table that's being set for us is a recognition that we're not the sole arbiters of our fate and our destiny. Joy adds, isn't this what COVID is doing to us? I think that's exactly what COVID is doing to us. And I think the journey that we're going to take this month and this year, unlike any other moment in our lives, and hopefully this is only the year that it's like this, is the recognition that it's not COVID itself. It's not COVID itself. It's the fact that this moment has created for us the responsibility to recognize and to pay attention to our behavior. We can't do things the way that we wanted to do them before because we might cause harm to other people in that way. We don't want to cause harm to people with our own health or with our negligence. None of that. That's just teaching us that it's a wonderful, beautiful thing, right? It's breaking us open. It's breaking us open and recognizing that we don't want to cause harm. So we better figure out how to cause blessing. So take a look with me and then we'll come back. Sin and moral imperfection. So I think about this, right? this wasn't a present experience, but it's happened very frequently in my life, right? There are times when something drops from my meal, or I have a little coffee stain, or something happens, and I get a stain on my shirt. And we have stains on our shirts, and usually what do? We put it in the laundry, we add a little bit of bleach, and we take it out of the laundry, and lo and behold, the stain is gone. And sometimes, maybe more often than not, there's a little bit of stain, especially if it's of a blueberry pie variety. And it's just impossible, or the red wine variety. It's impossible to get rid of our stains. So we can bleach it, and we can scrub it, and we can wash it. God forbid we should dry it, because then that'll ruin it. So we'll wash it again. And then we recognize that even if we can eliminate most of the stain, something still remains. So Yom Kippur is the day when we recognize that there may be some stains on our souls. And the work here is not to say that the stains are irreparable. The work here is to say that we have to do our hardest to try and clean up our messes. So this is from Larry Hoffman, who is a great rabbi and teacher and author of My People's Prayer Book. And those who've been studying with me before in the Prayer Mastery class, that we've been studying from the work that he compiled. It's a masterpiece of work. It goes through 10 volumes of just every element of Jewish prayer. And Rabbi Lawrence Hoffman writes here about his book, which is called We Have Sinned. He writes, classical Christianity saw sinfulness as essential to human nature, an original blemish inherited from the biblical Adam as a part of our DNA, so to speak. Right, so just by making a distinction, we're not Babylonians and we're not Christians. We're Jews, okay? We're not rehearsing rituals for an earthly and flesh and blood king, and we're not recognizing, we're not extending our flaws to be something inherent in our DNA. Classical rabbinic thought viewed sin as primal, in the sense that all of us partake in it, but not as the essence of who we are. Similarly, in the Jewish view, sin is something we do, not something we are. I just love that. So important. Underline that, score that. Something we do, not something we are. Even though the best of us do sin, we are not total sinners. Moreover, as elemental as sinfulness is, the human default position, according to Judaism, the one for which we were created, is to stand alongside God in goodness. It's the point when we are the directors and God is the director, and we are directing our destinies in goodness. The high holidays prescribe tshuva, return, as the starting point in a journey back to that default position, standing alongside God as human beings formed in God's own likeness. Jews suffice with the single revelation, which is both a challenge and a solution. A challenge because keeping the Torah laws without some degree of failure is near impossible, and a solution because the same Torah provides a means by which to return to God, who waits patiently for us, wanting only our return. One of the things that I think we struggle with when it comes to Yom Kippur, certainly in modernity, is the sense that we're going to go to the synagogue and we're going to say sorry for all the bad things that we did, and then God's going to forgive us, and we're going to be happy, and we're going to go back, and the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to honk our horns and yell at the people in the parking lot who are in our way. And we're going to eat our bread, and we're going to drink our drink, and we're going to say, oh my God, I can't believe I waited 25 hours for this food. If that's the goal of Yom Kippur, then it's a very shallow experience of what this time is. I'm not saying it doesn't have value, because the value of being with your people, the value of participating in a drama that's been unfolding for millennia, it has real power. And I think it humanizes us to a certain extent. But it's more than just the frame of experience. It's the concept of what's happening. What is that for? And this last teaching is to say that unlike the frame that says we're sinners and we're just going to ask for forgiveness and God's going to forgive us, but maybe not. We're not sure, or we're just going to recognize that we're flawed human beings, and we're going to hope and pray for salvation and mercy in our weakness. All of those things are antithetical to what Judaism has established for us as the purpose of tshuva. It's a homecoming. It's a return to the partnership that we read about in the very first chapters of our Bible, that God created us b'tselem Elohim, in the image of divine likeness, so that we may be partners, shutafut in Hebrew. We may participate as partners in the unfolding drama of humanity. That aspect of our unfolding drama of humanity requires that we must correct our sometimes misguided paths. And those misguided paths are, like the rabbis taught, primal. We're impulsive. We're narcissistic. We are sometimes focused on our own needs and not the needs of others. That's a very real and human experience. Judaism teaches us that with a little bit of work and a little bit of returning, a little tshuva, we can be aligned back with that partnership, that model of goodness that has been established long before us. As Bob wrote in the quotes, the table that was set before us. And that's the one that we sit and dine at with him, to use that metaphor. So, any comments just before we go on? How are we doing so far? Hopefully you guys are doing okay. Give me some thumbs up. Give me some challenges if you have anything that you wanted to raise as a question, and let's go on. We have just a few minutes, and I wanted to share two key elements. Now, the next element that I'm sharing from is what's called the slichot. Slichot, which means forgiveness, begins now. It begins on the beginning of Rosh Chodesh Elul. It continues every day through Yom Kippur. And the slichot, the petitions for forgiveness, have a very particular kind of poetic language to them. They do have, and some of the words that we're going to be reciting, the Ashamnu prayer, which you're familiar with. They won't have the Alchet, that's actually only recited on Yom Kippur, but they have this Ashamnu prayer as a part of it. And the idea is that leading up to Yom Kippur, if we're going to be humbled by the reality that we are not the complete masters of our destiny, if we're going to be humbled by the reality that we are shattered, actually, if we're humble enough to allow ourselves to be shattered, to be in the presence of others who are shattered, to hold each other close in our broken pieces, and to lift up those broken pieces one by one together, to piece together our lives, stitched together with blessing. If we're able to do that, then it's got to go through this process of forgiveness. We have to, like I said, humble ourselves, humiliate ourselves in order for that to exist. So there are lots and lots and lots and lots of words. In practice, there's a wonderful way to do this. And I have a book to share with us. I want to invite you, if you're really into this, to do something like what you can do in this book. It's called 60 Days. So the 60 days are the 30 days leading up to Tishrei, which we're in right now, and the 30 days which follow with Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and what happens after Sukkot. And this is by Simon Jacobson, okay? He wrote a book called Toward a Meaningful Life. And I'll put it in the chat box at another point. And the idea of this is that each and every day you have a meditation, a guiding set of ideas that help you recognize your path toward homecoming, your path home to be with God is something that involves a little bit of mercy, a little bit of recognition of your failings, a little bit of fear, and a little bit of awe, and a little bit even of joy. So here's what one of the Slichot writes. For in your abundant mercy we trust you, and on your righteousness we rely. And for your pardon we hope, and for your deliverance we yearn. You are a king who loves righteousness from of old, who passes over the iniquities of his people and removes the sins of those who fear him or in awe of him. You made a covenant with the patriarchs and will keep your oath with their descendants. You are the one who descended in the cloud of your glory on Mount Sinai and disclosed the ways of your goodness to Moses, your servant. The ways of your kindliness you revealed to him, and you made known to him that you are almighty, merciful, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness, and full of beneficence, guiding the entire world with the quality of mercy. And so it is written, I will cause to pass all my goodness before you, and I will proclaim the name Adonai in your presence. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will be compassionate to whom I will be compassionate. That's from the book of Exodus when God says, Hareini na kvotecha, show me your glory. God says, I will do that, right? And it will be with compassion, so says God. So now, after that sort of like conceptual introduction, we offer this prayer. Oh, that's actually the next one. We'll get to the next prayer. The slichot are about those beautiful, I mean, it's almost not a very, it doesn't feel very Jewish in a way. But it feels very, if you're sensitive, a very Christological kind of understanding of prayer, right? Mercy and bounty of goodness, and that God's goodness is so overwhelming that we're just asking for that goodness to be given to us. And the only thing that begins to make this Jewish is to say, you did this once before. That's a very Jewish thing. To say, we have been in relationship with you before. You remember your servant Moses, who's one of us, who was up on your mountain, and to whom you gave the Torah, and to whom you said that you wanted to destroy your people. And he stood in between you and us and said, save them. And you said that you would. You've done that before. And so if there is any inkling in this moment that our failing, that our need to ask for forgiveness is some way for sins that are too great to bear, you have to remember that even in that moment, when we said through Moshe, let your goodness be known. You, God, said, Adonai, Adonai, Rachum v'chanun, Erech hapayim v'rav chesed. God, O God, who is full of compassion and graciousness, who is long, forgiving, and patient and understanding, grants that kind of patience and that forgiveness to your people. Now, I suppose there's an element of this that is not only about us and divine experiences, but it's also about us and ourselves, right? And our capacity. And that you might have the same kind of conclusion to say, if God can be long suffering, patient, and abounding in kindness and compassion, and we're partners with God, then that means that we too can be long, patient, and understanding, compassionate and kind to all those whom have afflicted us, have caused harm to us by their sins of omission or their acts of aggression, their anger, their ignorance, things that have caused us harm. So there's this journey that says not only are we recognizing that we're in relationship with something that has the capacity to give mercy and forgiveness and kindness, but it's also that we have a certain capacity and a certain mercy and a certain kindness that we need to give. In the shattering that takes place, in the openness that is created during this journey through the holidays, that's when it begins for us. That's where we begin to see that we too can be merciful, compassionate, loving, and understanding, even in the most difficult of situations. Even in the most difficult of situations. What a terrible challenge that is. And what an important challenge that is to fulfill on a quest for a meaningful life. So now, everybody's okay? Let's go to our last piece. This is the Ashamnu. We recite this in the middle of the Amidah. It's actually at the end of the Amidah. We say our personal prayers. We conclude our personal prayers, and then we add this, so it'll be 5 times through the Yom Kippur holiday. Ashamnu prayer. And as I already introduced before, it has a melody, a very triumphant, sort of upbeat melody. You can even say a dirgy, but it still sounds kind of uplifting. Ya, da, 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 da. Even then, it still has a sense of uplift. Why? Because the work that we're doing is about the triumph of our souls. It's about us stitching the broken pieces back together. And the only way to do that is to recognize that we have failed. God and God of our fathers, ancestors, let our prayer come before you, and do not ignore our supplication. For we are not so brazen faced and stiff necked to say to you, Adonai, our God and God of our fathers, we are righteous and have not sinned, but indeed, we and our ancestors have sinned. And now you know this. It's an alphabetical acrostic. Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, Dibarnu, Dofi. We have trespassed, we have betrayed, we have stolen, we have slandered. The things in brackets are from the translation that I grabbed off of the internet. We've caused others to sin. We have caused others to commit sins for which they are called Risha'im, wicked. We have sinned with malicious intent. We have forcibly taken others' possessions even though we paid for them. We have added falsehood upon falsehood. We have joined with evil individuals or groups. We have given harmful advice. We have deceived. We have mocked. We have rebelled against God and God's Torah. We have caused God to be angry with us. We have turned away from God's Torah. We have sinned deliberately. We have been negligent in our performance of the mitzvot. We have caused our friends grief. We have been stiff-necked, refusing to admit that our suffering is caused by our own sins. We have committed sins for which we are called Rasha. We have committed sins which are the result of moral corruption. We have committed sins which the Torah refers to as abominations. We have gone astray, and we have led others astray. And the last part, every time we do a Shamnu 5 times throughout Yom Kippur, we say, Sarnu mitzvotecha, we've turned away from your commandments and from your good laws, and we have gained nothing from it. And you are the righteous one in all punishment that has come upon us, for you have acted truthfully, and we have acted wickedly. What shall we say before you who dwells on high? And what shall we relate to you who dwells in the heavens? For everything both hidden and revealed, you know. So the Ashamnu prayer is as much a litany that defines behaviors that we're all culpable of, that we all will inadvertently or intentionally commit at points throughout our lives. And the recognition that from Aleph to Taf, which is a signal of completion, right? That every little aspect of our language, our ability to articulate this recognition is filled with all the qualities and the natures which can define our failures. The goal of reciting these words is not just to hear the melody and the haunting experience of the melody and the practice of taking our fist and beating it back against our chest. Those are all very important, and they do connect us to the experience of the prayer and the experience of the holiday. But if you think about the history, and if you think about the memory, and if you think about what the present experience is, what is supposed to occur is that you recognize that this need for the human being to recognize her or his failure is something that humans have attempted to confront for thousands of years. The fundamental recognition that there is failure in our lives is a human recognition. And whether we pay attention to it or not is upon us. And that's why we actually need to draw upon memory when we do this. That's why Yudah Amichai has it right. If his mother and his father aren't there to model for him, but then it's not Yom Kippur. Or if the memory of his mother and father are not there, but then it's not Yom Kippur. And the same thing is true for us. Is we're holding on to this history, and those human moments have emerged throughout the history of humanity because we feel this even in our highly advanced modern experience of life. Our failure is real. And if we are courageous enough and humble enough to recognize our failures, it begins with the modeling that comes from those before us, those who've learned from their mistakes, who've been on their journeys. When we say Hashem nu Bagad Gazalnu, we're all when it says it in the plural Hebrew, it's a plural form. And in that plural form, what we're also saying is we're saying it's not just us, you and me, and the ones in the room who are saying the words at this very moment. But it's saying all of us, all of humanity, everybody present and everybody in the future is victim of these failed qualities of human experience. And so then you leave it with the question of what for? Judaism doesn't celebrate flagellation. We are not ascetics. It is not a recognition of our total unworthiness that makes us the most human. It is very much the recognition that we have B'Tselem Elohim. We have the image of divinity within us. And our humanity is something that prevents that divinity from shining, radiating in the world around us. And if we're looking for the radiance, the beneficence, the mercy, and the compassion and kindness of God, well, then we also have to radiate that beneficence and that mercy and that compassion and that kindness. Now, these words, they're just words. And when you read through the Machzor, they're just words on a page. They're not sacred incantations. They're not amuletic. It's not like you're going to affect the gods by the words that you say. But if you allow the words to affect you, then they have accomplished their goal. And so I'll leave you with this as a thought, that when you get to this point in your prayers, these words may guide you. They're beautiful and powerful words. But if these words do not inspire within you your own words and your own story, the own understanding of where in your drama and your life you are failing, and through this process, recognition of that failure, you're ready to make a change, then they're just words on a page. So let the words on a page speak to you and allow them to well up within you the feelings that you know are true to you. It's very hard to read some of these words and say, well, I didn't do that. Very hard words to say, or maybe check it off on the list, saying, oh, I didn't do that. I wasn't a liar. I wasn't a stealer. I wasn't a trespasser. I didn't violate anybody's personal space. None of that stuff. Check, 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 check. I guess I'm doing pretty well. That's not the goal. The goal is to say these are words that open up within us to say, even these failings are human. They're totally human failings. And if these things don't apply to you, then the things that make you human are absolutely applicable to you right now. And if you want to see transformation take place in this moment, it begins there. And that's where the point where you and God, the point where all of us and God begin to walk on the path of goodness together. As we're nearing the conclusion, I wanted to just say, pause for any questions and comments. Some very interesting things. Okay, so first, we have Joy who says, what does it mean to take when we have paid for it? That's a wonderful thing. So actually, just in this, it's a translation, right? But basically what it says is, we have forcibly taken others' possessions even though we paid for them, right? So, haven't you ever been in a marketplace and you're walking outside even before you put the stuff on the checkout counter, but it's in your cart, right? It's in your cart and somebody is trying to take, somebody comes into your cart and they'll be like, oh, that's the last set of Clorox wipes. Well, I want to get those, right? And you're like, you can't take those. Those are mine, right? That would be the forcibly taking other possessions, even though we pay for them kind of implication, right? You think about money on a table, but like taking possession, right? there's elements of it, right? And I have this wonderful bar mitzvah kid this weekend who's talking about this with grapes, right? He's talking because in the Torah portion it says, you can go to your neighbor's vineyard and you can eat their grapes, but you can't take them with you, right? In other words, but who says that you're allowed to just go up into somebody's backyard and you start eating their fruit? Well, the Torah says you can kind of do that, right? But it says that you can't take it with it. You can't bring it back and start filling your bag full of your neighbor's oranges, even though they're delicious, and you're going to make some great juice with it. You can't do that, but you can sort of share in the possession. So there's something about taking without sharing. And there's something about that I think is a part of this that is about sharing. So that's what I think. But feel free to offer a different point. Bob asked oh, that's really nice, right? The acrostic from Aleph to Taf is from silence. Aleph is a letter that has no intonation of itself. It's always borrowing a vowel in order for it to make a sound. And the other one is Taf, which is strong and hard and triumphant, right? It's trua, it's tekiah, right? It's that incredible proclamation. It's todah, it's like gratitude. It's like something certain and affirmative. And let's see, Joy writes, I do understand his shattering, but kept thinking with each reading, the author was fortunate to have had his parents at shul. Yeah, his cup had flowed over to have had that early life experience. You know what, that's truly beautiful. And, what I think he's adding as well is that, at any stage, when we lose our parents, we miss a certain kind of presence with them at any age. And despite that, that there's an attachment not only to their physical presence, but also to the quality of the experience. And I think he was trying to lift up in that, but I appreciate what you said. Thank you, Joy. I appreciate your comments. So anybody else, any other comments? I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that everybody has a fantastic evening. Please join me next Thursday evening at 7 p.m. as we continue with our Rosh Hashanah liturgy, our high holiday liturgy. We're now going to go back. We're going to go into Kol Nidre, I believe. So we're going to talk about that. Let's look at my notes. I believe that we're going to be talking about Kol Nidre. Be on the lookout for the great information and the opportunity to participate in the week to come. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great night.